Part 1, The Glue Trap. The acrid stench of burning chemicals filled the narrow maintenance tunnel as Commander Lyra stumbled forward, her metallic blue skin glistening with sweat under the dim emergency lights. Her left arm was coated in a viscous yellow substance that was rapidly hardening, sending waves of searing pain through her body. Each step became more difficult as the adhesive tightened around her limb, binding it to her torso. She clenched her teeth, trying to suppress the agony, but the pain was relentless. "Hold still, Commander," a firm voice commanded. Commander Jace Ryder, a human soldier with broad shoulders and battle-scarred armor, blocked most of the narrow passage as he examined her injury. His steel-gray eyes reflected focused determination, a stark contrast to the chaos around them. Lyra's breath came in ragged gasps as another spasm of pain shot through her arm. The experimental adhesive was meant as a defensive measure, but the containment unit's rupture had turned it into a deadly trap. "You need to cut it off," Lyra managed through clenched teeth, her golden eyes meeting his. "Before it spreads further." Jace ignored her plea, instead pulling various items from his tactical belt. "Not happening. There's always another solution if you look hard enough." His confident tone contrasted sharply with the gravity of the situation. Lyra watched in growing despair as he examined the crystallizing substance. Her snow-white hair clung to her face, matted with sweat and grime from their hasty escape through the tunnels. "This compound responds to electrical charge," Jace muttered, more to himself than to her. "If I can reverse the polarity." He pulled out his multi-tool and began carefully adjusting its settings. Lyra wanted to argue, but something in his tone made her pause. She had worked with humans before, but there was something different about Jace, a stubborn determination that went beyond mere duty or protocol. As Jace worked, the yellow substance had now completely immobilized Lyra's left arm, the crystalline formation creeping toward her shoulder. She bit back a whimper as another wave of pain washed over her. "Almost there," Jace murmured, making final adjustments. "This might tingle a bit." He pressed the device against the hardened material, and Lyra felt a strange vibration course through her trapped limb. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then, gradually, the burning sensation began to subside. Lyra watched in amazement as the crystalline formation started to soften, becoming more pliable. "The compound uses an electrochemical bond to harden," Jace explained, carefully working the device along her arm. "Reverse the charge, and the substance begins to slough off in chunks." "How did you know that would work?" Lyra asked, flexing her newly freed fingers in disbelief. Jace gave her a crooked grin. "Basic chemistry. That, and I've seen similar compounds before. The Arcturus defense course used something like this during the Centaur campaign." As the last of the compound fell away, Lyra rotated her shoulder carefully, testing the range of motion. "Thank you," she said, meeting his gaze. "I've never met anyone who would go to such lengths for a stranger." A distant explosion cut off the tunnel, vibrating with the impact. Jace was instantly alert, weapon drawn. "Save the thanks for later. We've still got to get out of here before they realize their little trap didn't work." Lyra nodded, drawing her own sidearm. She found herself studying Jace as they moved through the tunnel, the confident set of his shoulders, the precise economy of his movements. Everything about him spoke of capability and determination. They reached a junction, and Jace held up a hand for silence. Voices echoed from one of the connecting passages, along with the heavy tread of armored boots. "3 options," he whispered. "We can try to fight our way through, backtrack to find another route, or—" He gestured to a maintenance shaft above them, barely wide enough for one person. Lyra examined the shaft dubiously. "That's going to be a tight fit with your armor." "Sometimes the best solution isn't the most comfortable one," Jace replied, already reaching for the access panel. "Ladies first." Despite the danger of their situation, Lyra found herself smiling. "Such a gentleman," she whispered back, accepting his boost up to the shaft entrance. As she pulled herself in, she couldn't help but notice how naturally they worked together, how easily they anticipated each other's movements. The voices were getting closer. Jace quickly followed her into the shaft, pulling the access panel closed behind them just as flashlight beams swept the junction below. They lay perfectly still, barely breathing, as heavy boots passed directly beneath them. In the confined space, Lyra was acutely aware of Jace's presence, the controlled rhythm of his breathing, the faint warmth radiating from his body. When the voices finally faded, Jace turned his head slightly, meeting her gaze. "Looks like we'll be stuck here for a while," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. "Hope you don't mind close quarters." "I think I can manage," Lyra replied softly, surprised by the flutter in her chest at his proximity. She had always prided herself on maintaining professional distance, but something about this human was different. His unwavering determination to save her arm, his refusal to take the easy way out, it challenged everything she thought she knew about his species. As they lay there in the darkness, waiting for the danger to pass, Lyra realized that her perspective had shifted. This human had shown her something remarkable, not just survival at any cost, but the determination to find a better way, to reject simple solutions in favor of preserving what was valuable. It was a revelation that would change everything. Part 2, The Hidden Conspiracy. The maintenance shaft's cramped confines forced Jace and Lyra to remain close, their breathing synchronized in the darkness. The metal walls conducted the facility's ambient vibrations, creating an oddly intimate atmosphere in their hidden sanctuary. Lyra's empathic senses, usually carefully controlled, were heightened by the proximity. She could feel Jace's determination, his focus, and something else, a protective instinct that resonated deeply with her. "They're using thermal scanners," Jace whispered, his lips nearly brushing her ear. "Good thing your body temperature runs cooler than human standard. Makes us harder to detect." Lyra suppressed a shiver at his proximity. "Your armor's thermal dampening helps too," she replied softly, acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched. The tenderness in her recently freed arm had faded, replaced by a different kind of sensitivity. Through the grating below, they could hear fragments of conversation from their pursuers. Jace tensed as one voice grew clearer. "Prototype weapon designs in Section Delta. The adhesive trap was just a diversion." Lyra's golden eyes widened. "Seems we stumbled onto something bigger than a simple security breach," Jace murmured. "We should report this," she whispered back, turning her head slightly in the dim light filtering through the grating. Their faces were inches apart. "But that means getting to a secure comm terminal. There's one in the auxiliary control room, 2 levels up." Jace's breath was warm against her skin. "But getting there means crossing several exposed areas." Lyra found herself studying his features in the shadows, the strong line of his jaw, the intensity in his eyes. The events in the tunnel had shifted something between them, creating an electric awareness that had nothing to do with their tactical situation. "We could wait them out," she suggested, though her tone lacked conviction. "The search teams will have to rest eventually." Jace shook his head slightly. "If they're really developing illegal weapons here, we can't risk waiting. Those designs could disappear any minute." His hand brushed her arm where the adhesive had been, the touch sending unexpected warmth through her. "Besides, I don't think this shaft was meant for extended occupation." As if to emphasize his point, a distant rumble shook the facility. Dust sifted down from above, and the shaft creaked ominously. "Maintenance cycle," Lyra explained, recognizing the vibration pattern. "The environmental systems are balancing. It happens every few hours." "How long until the next cycle?" "About 3 hours." She shifted slightly, trying to find a more comfortable position. The movement brought them even closer together, and she felt Jace's breath catch. 3 hours, he repeated thoughtfully. "That gives us time to plan. The next cycle could provide cover for moving between sections." His hand was still resting lightly on her arm, his thumb absently tracing circles on her skin. Lyra found it increasingly difficult to focus on tactical considerations. Her species' natural empathic abilities, usually carefully controlled, were responding strongly to Jace's proximity. His determination, his unwavering protection of her, had awakened something she'd never experienced with previous partners. "You're thinking too hard," Jace observed softly. "I can practically hear the gears turning." "Just processing," Lyra admitted. "Everything that's happened. What you did back there with my arm." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "My people have a saying, actions reveal truth where words merely suggest it." Jace's hands stilled on her arm. "And what truth did my actions reveal?" "That humans are far more than what most species believe," she replied, turning further toward him. "That you fight not just to survive but to protect what matters. To find better solutions, even when it would be easier to." She trailed off as his other hand came up to brush a strand of white hair from her face. "We're stubborn that way," he said, his voice rough. "Especially about protecting what we care about." The air between them crackled with possibility. Lyra's empathic senses were overwhelmed by the intensity of his emotions, determination, protectiveness, and something deeper, more primal. Her own feelings resonated in response, creating a feedback loop of growing attraction. Another rumble shook the shaft, this one stronger than before. Below them, voices raised in alarm. "Something's wrong," Lyra whispered, reluctantly focusing on their tactical situation. That vibration pattern wasn't normal. Jace was already shifting into combat mode, though his hand remained protectively on her arm. Could they be forcing an early maintenance cycle? "Possibly," Lyra replied, her eyes widening as realization hit. "They're trying to flush us out. The environmental systems can be used to." A sudden blast of pressurized air from a nearby vent cut her off. The shaft groaned under the strain of the altered air pressure. "Time to move," Jace decided. "Ready to trust me again?" Lyra met his gaze in the darkness, remembering how he'd refused to take the easy way out with her arm. "Always," she whispered. His smile was barely visible but filled with promise. "Then hold on tight. This escape is going to require some creative solutions." As they began moving through the shaft, seeking a safe exit point, Lyra realized that their relationship had irrevocably changed. Whatever happened next, she and Jace had formed a connection that transcended their professional partnership. Part 3, The Council's Judgment. The auxiliary control room was a maze of flickering holographic displays and humming equipment. Jace secured the door while Lyra worked at the main terminal, her fingers dancing across the interface with practiced efficiency. Her recently freed arm moved without hesitation, though Jace noticed how she occasionally flexed her fingers, as if reassuring herself they still worked. "Security protocols are more sophisticated than expected," she muttered, her golden eyes reflecting the cascade of data. "But not sophisticated enough." Jace moved behind her, ostensibly to watch the screens but drawn by an increasingly magnetic pull. "What are we dealing with?" "The weapon designs are just the beginning," Lyra replied, her voice tightening as she decoded another layer of encryption. "Look at this." The display filled with schematics, not just for the adhesive compound they'd encountered but dozens of similar paralytic agents. Each was designed to incapacitate different species through various cruel methods. "Biological targeting," Jace growled, his hand unconsciously settling on Lyra's shoulder. "They're developing weapons that can selectively attack specific races." "The compound that nearly took my arm," Lyra said, leaning back slightly to draw comfort from his touch, "was calibrated specifically for my people's physiology. The fact that you could counteract it makes me think they haven't perfected the formula yet." Jace's thumb traced small circles on her shoulder, the gesture both protective and possessive. "We need to get this data out." A new alert flashed across the screens. Lyra's fingers froze over the controls. "Jace, look at the arrival logs. The manifest showed multiple high-level diplomatic shuttles landing at the facility's private dock. Among the names listed was one that made Jace's jaw tighten: Admiral Kale Voss, Earth's senior military liaison to the Galactic Council. "This goes higher than we thought," Lyra whispered, her hand coming up to cover his on her shoulder. "If Earth's own leadership is involved, then we trust no one except each other." Jace's voice carried that same unwavering determination that had made her believe in him before. "The Council needs to understand that humanity's strength lies in our connections, not our isolation." His other hand came to rest on her free shoulder, and she felt the warmth of him step closer. The proximity sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with fear. Her empathic senses were overwhelmed by his protective intensity, his absolute commitment to doing what was right, regardless of the cost. "The data transfer will take at least 20 minutes, she managed, trying to focus on the tactical situation even as her body responded to his nearness. "We'll be vulnerable until then. Then we'll have to find ways to pass the time," Jace murmured, his breath warm against her ear. The double meaning in his words was unmistakable. Lyra turned in her chair, looking up at him in the blue glow of the displays. His features were cast in sharp relief, the strong line of his jaw, the intensity in his steel-gray eyes. Her gaze dropped to his lips, then back up. "This is probably a terrible idea," she whispered, even as her hand came up to trace a scar along his jawline. "Probably," he agreed, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "But humans are notorious for terrible ideas that work out anyway." The tension between them had been building since the maintenance shaft, perhaps even since he'd refused to take the easy way out with her arm. Now it crystallized into something electric, inevitable. Lyra rose from the chair, eliminating the last distance between them. Her cooler body temperature made his human warmth feel like a sun, drawing her in. "Your species never does anything the simple way, do you?" she teased, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where's the fun in that?" His smile was equal parts dangerous and tender as his hand settled on her waist. "We prefer to find creative solutions." Their first kiss was like a fusion reaction, tentative for only a moment before explosive chemistry took over. Lyra's empathic senses merged with physical sensation, creating a feedback loop of shared passion. She felt his fierce protectiveness, his growing affection, his determination to cherish every moment despite the danger surrounding them. The terminal chimed, reminding them of their precarious situation. They broke apart, breathing heavily but remaining close. "Data is at 40%, Lyra reported, her voice husky. "We should probably keep watch." "While maintaining our tactical advantage," Jace finished, though his hands didn't leave her waist. "Is that what we're calling it?" She couldn't help but smile, even as her fingers traced the edge of his armor. "Among other things." His expression grew serious. "Lyra, when this is over." "I know," she pressed a finger to his lips. "Humans don't give up easily." "I'm counting on that." A sudden pounding on the door interrupted them. "Security breach in Sector 7. All personnel report status." They sprang apart, training taking over. Jace moved to a defensive position while Lyra quickly adjusted the terminal settings. "Transfer at 60%, she reported crisply. "But they'll trace the data flow soon." "Options: we can abort now, get what we have, or..." She met his gaze. "We can trust each other and finish what we started." The double meaning wasn't lost on either of them. Jace's smile was fierce and tender at once. "You know my vote. Humans always finish what they start, even if it means taking the hard way out. Especially then." He moved back to her side, one hand on his weapon while the other found hers. Together, Lyra squeezed his hand, feeling the strength and warmth of him. As alarms blared and boots thundered in the corridors outside, they stood their ground. The data transfer continued to climb while their hearts beat in sync, each knowing that whatever came next, they would face it as one. Some things, after all, were worth fighting for. Part 4, The Unity Initiative. The auxiliary control room door slid open with a hydraulic hiss. Jace and Lyra spun to face the entrance, weapons raised, but the figure that stepped through made them hesitate. Admiral Kale Voss stood in the doorway, alone and unarmed. His decorated uniform bore the marks of recent combat, and his usually immaculate silver hair was disheveled. Most surprisingly, he wore a slight smile. "At ease, Commander Ryder," Kale said, raising his hands. "And you, Agent Lyra. I believe we're all on the same side here." Jace kept his weapon ready, positioning himself slightly in front of Lyra. "With respect, sir, the evidence suggests otherwise." "The evidence suggests exactly what I wanted it to suggest," Kale replied, his dark eyes holding a keen intelligence. "Including the weapons data you're currently downloading. 92% complete, I believe." Lyra checked the terminal. "He's right," she whispered to Jace, her empathic senses detecting no deception from the Admiral, only a complex mix of satisfaction and concern. "I've spent the last 6 months building an elaborate fiction," Kale continued, stepping further into the room. "Making certain parties believe Earth was developing species-specific weapons while gathering evidence of their own illegal programs. Your discovery of the adhesive compound wasn't an accident, it was a test." "A test?" Lyra's voice held a dangerous edge. "That compound nearly cost me my arm." "And yet it didn't," Kale replied, nodding to Jace. "Because Commander Ryder demonstrated exactly what I needed to prove, that humans will always choose the harder right over the easier wrong." Jace lowered his weapon slightly. "You're running a counterintelligence operation?" "Several, actually," Kale's smile widened. "The real weapons programs are being developed by a faction within the Galactic Council. They believe humans are too unpredictable, too stubborn to control. They want insurance against our tendency to find unexpected solutions, like refusing to amputate when it would be simpler." Lyra said softly, her hand finding Jace's. "Exactly." Kale's gaze moved between them, noting their closeness with apparent approval. "Humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our military might. It's our refusal to accept unnecessary losses, our determination to find better ways." The terminal chimed. "Transfer complete," Lyra reported. "Perfect timing," Kale said, pulling out a secure communicator. "Because in about 2 minutes, this facility is going to become very interesting. The real weapons developers are about to discover they've been compromised, and they won't be happy." Alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Kale tossed Jace a data chip. "Extraction coordinates. There's a stealth shuttle waiting. I suggest you both make use of it." "You're not coming, sir." "I have a few more loose ends to tie up here," Kale replied, his expression growing serious. "The Council needs to understand that humanity won't be controlled through fear, but will always find another way." His gaze settled on Lyra. "And we'll always protect those we care about." The meaning behind his words was clear. Jace squeezed Lyra's hand, and she felt his emotions surge through their contact, determination, protectiveness, and something deeper that made her heart race. "The shuttle will take you to a secure location," Kale continued. "Where you'll have time to—" He paused, diplomatically. "Compile your report." Explosive charges detonated somewhere in the facility. Kale checked his communicator. "That's my cue. Good luck, both of you. And Commander." He fixed Jace with a knowing look. Sometimes the best solutions aren't found in the manual. After Kale left, Jace and Lyra shared a look that contained volumes. The facility shook with another explosion, but neither moved immediately toward the exit. "He planned all of this," Lyra said wonderingly. "Even us?" "Maybe he just recognized something worth protecting," Jace replied, drawing her closer. His free hand traced the arm that hours ago he'd refused to sacrifice. Something worth fighting for. Their kiss was fiercer this time, fueled by adrenaline and revelation. Lyra's empathic senses were overwhelmed by the intensity of his emotions, desire tempered by tenderness, passion balanced with protection. When they finally broke apart, Jace rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably get to that shuttle." "Probably," Lyra agreed, though she made no move to step away. "Unless you have another creative solution in mind." His laugh was low and full of promise. "Several. But they require a more secure location." His hand caressed her face, his thumb tracing her lower lip. "I plan to take my time proving just how stubborn humans can be, always choosing the harder path, always choosing the better one." His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "The one worth fighting for." Another explosion rocked the facility, closer this time. They reluctantly separated, gathering the vital data before moving toward the exit. But their hands remained linked, a physical connection that matched the emotional one growing stronger between them.